Imagine this. A wealthy man is preparing for a long journey. He's worked hard to build his wealth, and now he's ready to leave for a while. But before he goes, he calls three of his servants to him. Each of them has proven capable in the past, but now he's going to test their ability to manage what's his. He hands out his fortune in bags of gold, what they called talents back in the day. To the first servant, he gives 5 talents. To the second, he gives 2 talents. And to the third, just 1. Now, this might seem unfair at first glance. Why doesn't everyone get the same amount? But the master knows something we don't. Each person's ability is different, and he's giving them an amount they can handle. Then, without much explanation, he says, use this wisely, and leaves. What happens next is where the story gets interesting. The first servant doesn't waste a second. He gets to work, trading, investing, and using the resources at his disposal. He knows that his master trusted him for a reason, and he's determined to prove that trust wasn't misplaced. The second servant does the same. He might not have as much to work with, but he doesn't let that hold him back. He invests his 2 talents, working diligently to make the most of what he's been given. But the third servant, well, his response is very different. He looks at his single talent, and instead of seeing an opportunity, he sees a burden. He's afraid of messing up, afraid of losing what little he has. So he does something that seems on the surface safe. He digs a hole in the ground and buries the money. He tells himself it's better to preserve it than to risk losing it. Now, at this point in the story, we might sympathize with the third servant. After all, how many times have we held back because we were afraid of failure? But this is where the parable starts to challenge us. After a long time, the master comes back and calls the servants to account. First up is the servant with 5 talents. He steps forward confidently and says, "Master, you gave me 5 talents. Look, I've gained 5 more." The master's face lights up. "Well done, good and faithful servant," he says. "You've been faithful with a few things. I'll put you in charge of many things. Come and share in my happiness." Next comes the servant with 2 talents. He says, "Master, you gave me 2 talents. Look, I've gained 2 more." And again, the master is overjoyed. "Well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful with a few things. I'll put you in charge of many things. Come and share in my happiness." But then the third servant steps forward. He's not confident. In fact, he looks a little nervous. He says, "Master, I knew you were a hard man, harvesting where you haven't sown and gathering where you haven't scattered seed. So I was afraid and went out and hid your talent in the ground. Here it is, safe and sound." Now, if you were the master, how would you respond? Relief? Annoyance? Well, the master doesn't hold back. He calls the servant wicked and lazy. He says, "If you knew I was that kind of man, why didn't you at least put my money in the bank so I could have earned some interest?" Then he takes the 1 talent away from the servant and gives it to the one with 10. So what's the lesson here? It's simple but powerful. What you do with what you've been given matters. God has entrusted each of us with unique gifts, resources, and opportunities. Maybe you've been given 5 talents, maybe 2, or maybe just 1. But the amount isn't the point. The point is how you use it. The first 2 servants understood this. They didn't focus on what they didn't have. They focused on making the most of what they did have. And because of their faithfulness, they were rewarded. But the third servant, he let fear control him. He played it safe, thinking he could just preserve what he was given. But in God's kingdom, doing nothing with your gifts is not an option. Fear isn't an excuse to bury your potential. The truth is, God doesn't expect perfection. He's not asking for you to multiply your talents perfectly or take risks without thought. What he wants is faithfulness, effort. He wants you to step out and try. Because when you do, even if you stumble, you grow. And that's where the real reward is. Now let's break this down a little further. First, what's a talent? In Jesus' time, a talent was a massive sum of money, equivalent to about 20 years' wages for a laborer. Today, we can think of it as representing anything God has given us: skills, time, resources, or opportunities. Second, why the fear? The third servant's fear wasn't just about losing the money. It was about misunderstanding his master. He saw him as harsh and unforgiving, which isn't the case with God. Fear distorts our view of God and holds us back from stepping into our purpose. And finally, the call to stewardship. This parable isn't just about money, it's about responsibility. Whether you've been given much or little, God calls you to use it for His glory. And the good news is, when you do, He multiplies your efforts beyond what you could imagine.